Tonight's special guest speaker, John Nelson, is the president of Audubon of Martin County and a member of Audubon Florida's board of directors. For the last 15 years, he's been the voice of the Audubon Moment, a popular weekly radio program aired on WQCS. John is an accomplished wildlife photographer and documentary filmmaker. Some of you may remember his last Coastal Lecture Series presentation a couple of years ago, where he captivated us with tales from his historical documentary, America's Amazon, the story of the St. Lucie River. Tonight, John will share a different story with us, one focused on the history of the Florida Everglades and how society has spent the last 150 years working to conquer, drain, destroy, and more recently, restore the beloved river of grass. Folks, please help me welcome to the stage, John Nelson.
There we go. You can hear me now, right? All right, now, I didn't do this, but he brought it up. How many of you listened to the Audubon Moment? All right, my groupies, thank you very much. I appreciate that. The Everglades is really an interesting watershed. And when I did my documentary film on the St. Lucie River, we had no choice but to also bring into focus what was going on in the Everglades. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing tonight as well, because 150 years ago, the Everglades extended into Martin County. You may not think that, but it was actually very much a part of the Everglades watershed. Before we get started on that, though, I want to again reiterate my thanks to several key critical people. One of which is in one of the back rows tonight, Sandra Thurlow, our historian extraordinaire from Martin County. And incidentally, her daughter, Jackie Thurlow-Lippich, is also with us, and she's going to be speaking at our 70th anniversary banquet 2 nights from now for Audubon of Martin County. We're turning 70 years old, so we're really thrilled to have her there. The Elliott Museum has also been really critical in giving me research, and you're going to see some photographs tonight that probably you have never seen before that came out of the Elliott archives. And then, of course, the Florida Oceanographic Society for not only supporting me for this lecture series, but also with the initial support of the film, America's Amazon, story of the St. Lucie River. I've used all kinds of different research sources to be able to gather historical documentation about not only this presentation, but also for the film series as well. And we are going to be talking about the Everglades in its current situation tonight, but in order to be able to get there, we have to give you a historical perspective on where we've come from, what the Everglades used to be like, and what we're trying to transform it back into tonight. So you can see some of the different sites there. Believe it or not, I even had to go to Seattle City Light Photographic Archives to be able to get some of the information. It's amazing where you get some of the information as the internet threads lead you, if you will. As I said, 4 years ago, actually it was 5 years ago, in fact, no, we're 26, it was 6 years ago, almost to the day that we premiered America's Amazon, the story of the St. Lucie River. At the Lyric Theater. It was a sold-out crowd. We had a waiting list of over 200 people trying to get in. And the story of the St. Lucie River, as I said, is really so much entwined with the Everglades that it's really hard to talk about one without talking about the other. You can see this documentary, by the way, for free. All you have to do is go to YouTube. Since we put it on YouTube, it's been viewed by over 51,000 people. All you have to do is simply, in the search bar for YouTube, just put in America's Amazon, the story of the St. Lucie River, and you come right to it. It's very, very well worth your while. I don't get paid by the hit. Yeah. so yeah, we didn't make any money off of this. It was a production of love, if you will. But it took 3 years worth of research and another year of production in order to be able to make this documentary. And it's just as relevant today as it was 6 years ago. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Everglades. It says here the Everglades operates as a slow, shallow, and wide river of grass, typically moving at a rate of about 0.5 to 2.5 miles per day, or about 100 feet per hour. That's not exactly a river that you're going to go whitewater rafting in, is it? No, I don't think so. The sheet flow can span up to 60 miles wide with a gradient of about 2 inches per mile. In other words, it goes downhill at the rate of about 2 inches per mile. Not very steep. Seasonal variations can occur with wet season flow rates as high as 1 mile per day, but if water starts getting pushed inland, that sheet flow rather, can completely stop. So it's really amazing what happens with the Everglades and how much variation it has. We're going to be talking about two primary people tonight. The first one is that gentleman there by the name of Hamilton Diston. You've all heard of people wanting to sell you, hey, I've got the title to the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, that's kind of what this guy is like. He decided that he wanted to get in on some Florida real estate, and shortly after the state of Florida was founded, they ran out of money, the state government did. And so they decided to sell a bunch of land, and he thought that he could take the Everglades and turn it into a residential community, or even better yet, agricultural farmland. And they've been trying to do that almost ever since. The second person we're going to talk about is Marjory Stoneman Douglas. I think most of you, if not all of you, know who Marjory Stoneman Douglas is, and she tirelessly worked to preserve this incredibly unique ecosystem. She was not a professional scientist. Some of the greatest environmentalists that we've had in the last 100 to 150 years have been people just like you and I. You know, I have a sociology and cultural anthropology degree from Seattle Pacific University. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a naturalist by trade. I fell into it. I went to high school in East Africa. My high school is called Rift Valley Academy, if anybody knows that. It's in Kajabi, Kenya. And back in 2006, I went back for the 100th anniversary of the founding of our school. And while I was out there, I started photographing some of the wildlife that I had known to love while I was in high school. And the last day of filming, I came across this zebra, and he kind of did this Vulcan mind meld eye lock on me. You know, and wild animals don't stare at you. They just don't, because that's considered to be a very hazardous and threatening posture. But he just wouldn't let go of me. You know, and it suddenly dawned on me as we're going through this little Vulcan mind meld thing that I knew more about the African animals than I knew what was in my own backyard. And I was embarrassed and ashamed about that. And so I came back to Florida, and we lived on the water at the time, and I told my wife, you know, look, let's get the boat. We're going to go up and down the St. Lucie River. Let's see what we can find. And that's how I got my start in environmental awareness here in Florida. Marjory Stoneman Douglas, she kind of had the same type of revelation. You know, she came to Florida because of a disgraced marriage. Her husband at the time was a check swindler. He was trying to get people to write checks that he could cash that he had no intention of carrying out, or he would do blank rubber checks, that kind of thing. And to get away from all that, she decided that the best thing that she could do was divorce him and move away. And her father happened to be running a newspaper in Miami that, a few years later, would be known as the Miami Herald. And so she came down to Florida. Her father, being the owner and editor-in-chief, gave her a position as a reporter. And as we know now, the rest is history. But we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. Hamilton Diston, as I said, he was a land developer. He really honestly thought that he could drain the Everglades and turn it into farmland. Little did he know how stupid that of a proposition that was, but he tried. It says here, you know, he was given a sweetheart deal. He got 4 million acres in 1881, and within just a couple of years, he thought that he had drained 2 million acres of land. What he didn't realize was that the land was in a severe drought at the time. And once the rains came, let me tell you, there's that old childhood song, and the rains came down and the floods came up. Well, that's exactly what happened. The rains came down and the floods came up. And it wasn't too long before he realized that he had made a terrible mistake, and he died by suicide. Here is the staff of the Miami Herald in 1914. Marjory Stoneman Douglas was given the reporter's job in 1915 by her father, Frank Bryant Stoneman. He was the editor-in-chief. And believe it or not, she was one of the first women to serve in the United States Navy. during World War I. And when she came back, she returned to the Herald and became an assistant editor. Her assignment when she came back was to become the socialite editor. And it just so happened that most of the women in the Miami area had taken up a cause, and that cause was to stop the killing of wading birds. At the time, it was very fashionable for wading birds to have these big plumes. And unfortunately, all of those bird plumes came at the expense of killing not only the adult birds, but killing the adult birds during mating season. And most of these birds would be killed while they were on the nest, either trying to incubate eggs or taking care of young. And within a very short period of time, Florida's wading bird population went from an estimated 2,400,000 to only about 100,000 because of the slaughter. So the women in the Miami area started fighting against that and organizing. And that's really what caught Margaret Stoneman Douglas's eye and ear to the environmental issues that were taking place not only in the Everglades, but everywhere else around the state. Things really started kicking off, though, in 1904. We have Broward County, and I sure wish they would name that county after somebody else. But what can I say? Napoleon Broward was elected in 1904 on the campaign promise to drain the Everglades. Agriculture was big. Agriculture was really big. And in fact, before 1904, the University of Florida and the Florida state government had been experimenting with agriculture around the south end of Lake Okeechobee. That experiment would later on become the Everglades agricultural area that we know of today. But it started back at that point in time. So during inauguration, he campaign promised, we're going to drain the Everglades. And if any of you are history students, you remember the Oklahoma land rush. There is this literally a starting line, and at the blowing of a trumpet or whatever it was, a bugle, people would just scamper off across the Oklahoma plains to try to make their claims for land. And that's almost literally what they were trying to do in Florida, but they found that it was a little bit more difficult to drain the Everglades than it was to do land stakes in Oklahoma. Some of the local cartoons at the time, little baby says, "Mom, when do we have to move out?" And Mom, I think that's a great blue heron. Mom says, "Not during the present administration." Because, again, they were finding it was a lot more difficult to drain the Everglades than they thought. And in fact, in 1904, they didn't even know what they were thinking of because the land had never been surveyed. So in 1913, a commission was set forth. It says, while the EAA, the Everglades Agricultural Area, was formally recognized in Congress in 1947 and 1948, agricultural ventures had been started in the area as early as 1913. To carry out this mandate, Florida Everglades Engineering Commission was established, and the Everglades was surveyed starting in May 12, 1913, to about the 25th of July, 1913, in preparation for a drainage system being imposed. These are some of the very first pictures that had been released by the Elliott Museum. These pictures were donated to them by some people here in Martin County. And this is of the Martin County survey team that had started at the headwaters of the Loxahatchee River. They moved into Lake Okeechobee, surveyed all around Lake Okeechobee, and then they were to go south, and they would meet up with a second team that had started down Broward County, and they were moving north. And they were hoping that they would be able to survey the entire Everglades system. Well, they didn't start far enough south for starters. They should have gone all the way down to Key Largo and started from there. But you can see there that the conditions for the survey were brutal. And any explorer in the 17 and 1800s would have told you that the Everglades was a death trap. In the 15 and 1600s, they didn't even know that Lake Okeechobee existed. If you take a look at some of the maps during that time, Lake Okeechobee wasn't even on there. And anybody that was stupid enough to go venturing into this area, nobody really expected them to come out alive. And such as was the case in 1913 as well. The intent was to establish the southern limits of the Everglades. This is split into two parties, a main one to run a transit and level line, and the auxiliary party running offsets, and I'm sorry, I'm not a surveyor, so I don't know what an offset is, up and down to get information about the limits of fresh and salt water in the Big Cypress area. And there's this poor guy up around Lake Okeechobee that is wading through the water, and who knows what's in that water to meet him. What can I say? So they gave it their best efforts. They tried to do a survey in 1913. I'm sure that they were at least partially successful. But what really changed the Everglades for the worse were the hurricanes that hit both in 1928 and 1926. The hurricane in 1928 was never supposed to hit Florida, according to the National Weather Service. I guess they didn't have Al Roker with them at the time. By the way, if anybody watched the Today Show, today is the 30th anniversary of Al Roker on the Today Show. He is such a cool dude, but that's a whole other story. Anyhow, it was devastating to Puerto Rico, but many Floridians didn't give it a second thought until it actually did hit at West Palm Beach. It went inland, and here you can see two tornadoes or waterspouts at that time going across Lake Okeechobee. The end result was over 3,000 people were killed, and if you go down Canner Highway, just before you get to Port Mayaca, there's a cemetery on the left-hand side of the road, and over 1,600 victims of that hurricane are buried in a mass grave at that cemetery, and you can see the memorial for them to this day. So that changed things a lot, let me tell you. You can see some of the devastation there. These are the picture on the left is in West Palm Beach. This is further out in the rural area on the right. The corpses were everywhere, and they had to line up the corpses, and then they had wooden pine boxes there for that's not crates; those are coffins. And the people that had any kind of relatives, they were able to get a decent burial, but the ones that did not, they simply put them in a mass grave and called it good enough. So dead bodies lined up everywhere. After the hurricanes, it became obvious that if this area was going to be developed into kind of any type of agricultural area, that they had to do something about the water. The reason why these hurricanes were so devastating to the Lake Okeechobee area was because they felt that a dike 5 feet high would be more than sufficient to take care of a lake. But a 5-foot-high dike is suicide, and they quickly discovered that. And so shortly after the hurricanes, the federal government got involved and they started building a dike that eventually went all the way around Lake Okeechobee. And here you can see some of the construction pictures that we were able to get from the National Archives. Some more of the construction. By comparison to some of the great dams being constructed in the west coast of the United States and the Tennessee Valley Authority, everybody thought that it would be a piece of cake just to build a simple dike. I mean, how difficult can that be? All you got to do is just line up a whole bunch of dirt and call it good enough. It turned out that this project started in about 1930, 1931. It didn't finish until 1960, 1961. And even then, they were still doing more projects, for the sake of flood control. And that didn't end until the late 60s, early 70s. Here's water release gates that are being built by the dike. This is up right around the city of Okeechobee. And again, dredging, flood control along the lake and the dike. Very, very extensive project. Well, it was devastating that they had so many people that were killed, but what was the real reason why they were doing all of this? Well, the real reason was for agriculture. Because, again, I told you that there was some experimental farming that was taking place in 1913, and they discovered that this land, this muck land, was fabulous for sugarcane. And so,
this is Mary Campbell.
The farmers came. They started developing not only sugarcane, but vegetables and other types of cash crops. And during the Depression, there were two great migrations of farming. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I forgot that was on there. That's one of the songs that was written. That was sung during the the farmers in the Great Depression. By the Great Depression time, the EAA, which had not been formally recognized at that time, had really been developed into quite a farming area. And again, thousands upon thousands of people were going down into this area to try to gain some type of viable living. And the federal government, again, they built migrant camps for them, but they were so few and far between. These were considered sanitary camps because the alternative, and there's one of the stores for the sanitary camps where you could get some provisions at reasonable prices, but the alternative to sanitary camps was deplorable. This is around Belglade and Pahokee, and you can see that that does not look like anything that would be fun to live in. How about that? In today's economy, that would probably sell for $200,000, but back then, no, I don't think so. And here's row after row after row of shanty all along Belglade for some of the farm workers that would come in there and try to eke out a subsistence in this agricultural farming land. So again, the agriculture in Florida was booming. It was growing like crazy, and they needed a way of being able to not only protect the farmers there, but especially the land so they can continue to do what they were doing. And so the construction kept on going. You can see the dredging operations in 1935, levee construction in 1932. In the late 50s and early 60s, by that time they had some of the flood control gates involved and some of the locks. Believe it or not, at the St. Lucie locks, they actually installed a hydroelectric generator out there. And the water flow that would come through the canal and down through the locks would actually produce power. There used to be 2 locks down there, one of which is filled in, and it's a nice kind of a grassy knoll area, if you will. But the other one is obviously is still there. Finally, in 1961, President Hubert Hoover, who was the second in that there were a row of 3 people, he dedicated the lock. It was named after him, and everybody thought that's good enough. But oh no, we can't stop there. They thought, well, you know, the Kissimmee River, boy, it would be so nice if we could just drain all those headwaters of the Kissimmee River, and if we could just drain that water and relocate it somewhere so it doesn't go into the Everglades, that'll just make Everglades development that much better for us because they won't have to do anything with the land. So they channelized the river, they straightened it out, as you can see there, and they got it into Lake Okeechobee. And then they simply decided, well, let's make the Caloosahatchee River and the St. Lucie River the toilet bowls of South Florida. And we'll just flush it all down, and it can, part of it can go into the Gulf of Mexico. Thank you. And the other part can go into the Atlantic Ocean. And so that's exactly what they did. But as soon as they did that, all of a sudden Lake Okeechobee started filling up with muck and sediment, and it got incredibly polluted, and bingo, there we are, the summer of 2013. And that's where we've been for the last 15 or 20 years. And it's just disgusting what has been the end result. Fortunately, things are starting to change. But like I said, it took a lot of effort, and hundreds of millions of dollars, but we finally managed to change our environment into an unsustainable system that we are now trying to restore at the cost of, and the current estimate is about $26.8 billion. That's your taxpayer money. When the Everglades Restoration Program first started, we thought it was going to be about a little over $8 billion, but pollution, and it just gets getting more and more polluted, and inflation just gets, it keeps getting more and more costly, I guess you could say. Now, in the middle of all of this, we did have a couple of environmental champions, such as Margaret Stoneman Douglas, that were able to have some great successes. And in 1947, the Everglades was deemed a national park. And it was one of the first, if not the first, national park that was made not because of its quote-unquote natural beauty, but because of its biological diversity. And yet by 1947, the biological diversity in the Everglades had been tattered and just put in shambles compared to what it had been 100 years before. So let's look at the timeline that we have here for what we've been going through. In 1945, Florida becomes a state with 58,000 residents. In 1947, first proposal to drain the Everglades was made. That long ago they were thinking about that, because after all, it was wasteland, right? We could do something else with it. In 1850, the Swamp and Overland Lands Act granted the state 20 million acres of federal land to drain and to reclaim, for drainage and reclaim, if I could talk tonight, I'd be dangerous, and reclamation projects, there we go. I'm still in the 1900s, forgive me. In 1879, U.S. Army engineers recommended the dredging of the Caloosahatchee River from Fort Myers. And incidentally, they did that. And Hamilton Diston was the principal mover for that. And they actually had a paddle wheel passenger service from Tampa up to Lakeland by means of going up the Caloosahatchee River and then into Lake Okeechobee and up the Kissimmee River. That was regular passenger service. So that actually did happen. In 1881, Florida sells 4 million acres of land to Hamilton Diston for $200,000. What a deal. In 1882, Diston begins dredging activities to connect the Kissimmee, the Caloosahatchee rivers through Lake Okeechobee. And in 1884, he thought over 2 million acres had been drained. And it had been, temporarily. In 1891, the first U.S. development of agricultural experimental farms was opened, growing 30 varieties of sugarcane on 40 acres. In 1882, the St. Lucie River Inlet opened, with the Indian River Lagoon and the St. Lucie River becoming brackish. Now, Sandra Thurlow told me about this story. It took 3 times to open up the St. Lucie River Inlet. The first time was just a miserable failure. The second time, they almost had it, and suddenly the work crew that was doing this work, they had a bunch of eligible bachelors in there, and this really hot young little chick decided to throw a party for all these guys. And just before they were going to open up the inlet, all the work stopped. They went to this lady's party, and all their work just kind of fizzled out, and they never got it open. So the third time, in 1892, they finally hired a professional company to open up the St. Lucie River, and it's been opened up ever since. The consequences of that was both good and bad. The freshwater St. Lucie River turned brackish, but it also brought in a lot of marine creatures as well that changed the St. Lucie River forever. In 1913, the first extensive survey of the Everglades was conducted, as I was showing you. In 1913, the first Clark Construction Company of Baltimore, Maryland, and Galveston, Texas, began construction on the St. Lucie Canal from 1915 to 1926. What many people don't realize is the St. Lucie Canal originally was a canal that was only supposed to be built for commerce, for barge commerce. It was originally constructed to only be about 4 feet deep, just deep enough for barge traffic to go between Martin County and Fort Myers. And they thought that that would be a great way to be able to have agricultural produce go across the state instead of having to go around through the Florida Keys and back up. So that was their original concept. But in the 1928 hurricane, after everybody was all those massive amount of people were killed, they decided it was time to deepen and widen the canal and turn it into, instead of a canal for commerce, a canal for flood control. In 1929, the U.S. Army Corps recommends the construction of additional locks, canals, and dikes. In the initial phases of the Hoover Dike was completed in 1938, but the entire system was not completed until 1961. In 1950 through 1971, extensive flood control and water conservation structures were built. In 1969, the Florida Air and Water Pollution Control Act was enacted. In 1971, the Governor's Conference concluded that water quality in South Florida was steadily deteriorating in nearly all aquatic systems. I wonder why. In 1973, the Florida legislature creates special projects to prevent the eutrophication of Lake Okeechobee following the channelization of the Kissimmee River. As I said, they opened up the Kissimmee River in 1971, I believe it was, and almost immediately they started seeing devastating results. And much of that muck that came down into Lake Okeechobee is still there to this day. If you want to see what the lake was really like before all that, you need to go into the Buckhead Ridge region of Lake Okeechobee. That water is still pristine, and in fact, we do airboat tours every now and then with some of the airboat operators to show what Lake Okeechobee used to be like throughout the entire water system there. 1977, Port Mayaka Lock was completed on Lake Okeechobee. In 1978, Governor Askew creates state comprehensive plan stating that the reliance on natural systems is preferable to the creation of new engineering works. A little late to realize that, don't you think? So, After all that was debated for quite some time, it was finally decided in the year 2000, signed by President Bill Clinton, that we needed to have a comprehensive Everglades restoration plan, passed in Congress in the year 2000, and it currently includes 68 infrastructure projects across Florida. So now we're talking about today. When the plan was first devised, they had no idea that they were going to have that many projects to be able to reverse what had been done, in the last 150 years. Authorized in the year 2000, it is a 35-plus year plan. Again, this says a $20+ billion federal-state partnership designed to restore the project. The latest estimates that I saw just yesterday was a little over $26 billion right now. I'm sure it would be more than that, to be perfectly honest with you. Fortunately, the plan is well on its way to being completed. I have no idea when the actual completion date of this is going to be, but there are parts of the project that have come into play and are now complete. In fact, just in the last week, I received special information bulletins from Audubon, Florida, about the completion of at least one plan that I'll share with you here a little bit later on. The plan covers 18,000 square mile area, aiming to reverse decades of degradation. The goal is to restore the natural flow, the quality, and the timing of water to the river or grass while enhancing water supplies and managing flood control. Earlier, I told you that we had a mass slaughter of birds, in the Everglades by plume hunters. But we've had just as much of a loss of birds and other wildlife because of mismanagement of this area. When you have water that is so polluted that natural food resources can't grow in it, that also affects our wading birds. That also affects other types of species. When you have people releasing pythons into the Everglades. And now suddenly, a few years later, well, more than a few, but 10 to 20 years later, we have a 90% reduction in small mammals in the Everglades because they've been eaten by pythons. That's a big problem. And how do you reverse something like that? There's so many problems that we have in the Everglades. When you have, global ocean rise, is pushing salt water, intruding into the southern part of Florida Bay and into the Everglades, forcing some of the species, including roseate spoonbills, to take cover by coming further and further inland. That's a problem. Audubon, Florida, and the National Audubon Society is predicting that by the year 2100, roseate spoonbills will be seen as far north as North and South Carolina, because they are moving further and further away from their natural sources of habitation. And they're the lucky ones, because they are the ones that are able to move. But there's many other species that simply don't have that privilege. One of those is the Everglades snailkite. The Everglades snailkite has suffered tremendously because of man-made water decisions on how to increase or decrease water levels on Lake Okeechobee. Their population has gone, in 1 year, their population went from 3,000 birds down to a little over 700 because all of their food resources were flooded out by decisions to increase the water level, and the increased water level flooded all the eggs that they had that would turn into channel snails, which was their main food source. And as a result, they starved to death. So it was horrible. So anyhow, the goal is to reverse the natural flow, and that's what the SERP is all about. Water entering the Everglades is significantly polluted with high levels of nutrients, specifically phosphorus, from agricultural fertilizer and sulfates, causing massive ecological imbalance. Now, we've made a lot of progress on that, but we still have a ton of progress to go. And this comes directly from the Friends of the Everglades, despite $1.8 billion in cleanup efforts resulting in 90% of the area meeting cleaner standards, nutrient runoff continues to fuel harmful algae blooms and invasive cattails. Audubon of Florida partners with the South Florida Water Management District in providing public access to some of their STAs. That stands for Stormwater Treatment Area. Stormwater treatment areas are artificial marshes that are created out in these areas surrounding Lake Okeechobee, mostly in the south, but some on the eastern shores as well. And these STAs are efforts to, through aquatic vegetation, take out the phosphates and the nutrients from the water At the Lakeside Ranch Stormwater Treatment Area, for example, that we manage public access to, water comes into that STA loaded with about 200 parts per million of phosphates. When it leaves, it's down to about 20. It should be down to about 10, but that's a tremendous reduction in the amount of phosphate load that we have in that water. The Miccosukee Indians sued the state and federal governments for water releases that were too polluted at one point in time. And that is one of the reasons why we've had such a critical shortage of water. But we can't blame the Miccosukee Indians for that, because the water that was being released before that lawsuit was so polluted that it wasn't helping anybody at all. So they've really kind of helped us to wake up to the fact that we need to make sure that our water is purified before it goes into the Everglades, especially the southern part of the Everglades system. And another problem that we've had recently that is now being rectified is that for those of you who 10 years ago drove across the Tamiami Trail across the Everglades, it was like a natural dike, wasn't it? There was hardly any type of water flow that could get through. Well, now large sections of the Tamiami Trail are above ground, and it has increased the water flow to bring water down into the southern part of the Everglades. Here's, again, many of you have probably seen this before, but this is a chart that shows on the far left what the natural water flow was before we got involved. And then, once all the man-made water projects were completed, in the 1970s, you can see here that, as I call it, the toilet bowl effect of the St. Lucie River and the Caloosahatchee, just simply taking all that extra water that farmers didn't need and throwing it into the Gulf of Mexico and to the Atlantic Ocean. And so now what we're trying to do is we're trying to basically, through SERP, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program, to reassert the water flow going down into the Everglades. Critically important that we do that for all of our species. And not only that, it's critically important for us, because the water flow that goes down into the Everglades here also filters down into the underground aquifers and becomes fresh water for a lot of the people that live in South Florida. So the crown jewel of the EAA, as I like to call it, of the SERP program is the EAA reservoir. It's under construction right now. The EAA reservoir will be located south of Lake Okeechobee, and it's designed to store excess Lake Okeechobee water so it can be cleaned in an adjacent stormwater treatment area and then sent south to nurture the Everglades in Florida Bay. Now, 6 years ago, when I did my research, actually about 7 years ago, since I was doing the research for America's Amazon, the story of the St. Lucie River, I had a personal interview with a lady by the name of Judy Sanchez, who is the public media coordinator for U.S. Sugar. And at that lunch meeting, she said, and I'm almost quoting verbatim here, that U.S. Sugar will not sell 1 acre of land to anybody for the purpose of establishing a stormwater treatment area. Okay. Obviously something happened. And that something that happened is you standing up and taking notice and making sure that there was political pressure on people to get the Everglades and to get the St. Lucie River watershed back into some state of environmental correctness, if you will. It finally caused the Florida legislature and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Congress to allocate money for a large reservoir for the purpose of storing and eventually cleaning water before it goes down into the Everglades. So the EAA reservoir has been called the crown jewel of Everglades restoration, as it is the single most important project to store, clean, and send water south from Lake Okeechobee into the Everglades, helping restore South Florida's natural water flow. And that's absolutely true. It's a huge project. The reservoir will also supply fresh water to the Biscayne Aquifer, as I was alluding to earlier, which is the source of drinking water for millions of South Floridians. And the EAA reservoir will also help to significantly reduce the harmful discharges of polluted Lake Okeechobee water to the Florida's east and west coast. So there is some hope that we will not have a lost summer again. There's hope that we won't have devastating algae blooms of 2013 and 2016 and 2018. We don't have to do massive demonstrations that, where we have people lined up on the beach in the form of a big, big sign of human people saying, buy the land. The land has been bought. And again, we owe it to you guys. It's really cool. Here's where the EAA reservoir is going to be. This is the Everglades agricultural area as it stands right now. And you can see down there where it says A2 parcel and A1 FEB. That's where the Everglades EAA reservoir and STA is being constructed to this day. You'll also see that there are some other STAs. There's STA 1 West, STA 1 East. This is the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. There's some STA 5 and 6. There's lots of STA, stormwater treatment areas, all around the south part of the EAA. So these are critical areas where we can have our water naturally purified before it goes down into the Everglades. Here's the EAA reservoir that is currently under construction. I don't know what the date of this was. I know that the reservoir is much more of a completed state than that, however. At a combined 17,000 acres, a 10,500 acre reservoir and its 6,500 acre STA, or stormwater treatment area, will be bigger than the island of Manhattan. The reservoir itself will store about 78 billion gallons, enough water to fill more than 118,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and lower water levels in Lake Okeechobee by about 6 inches. 6 inches doesn't sound like a lot, but believe me, for Lake Okeechobee, that's a lot. So that's pretty impressive what they're trying to do there. Now, there's some other areas in the Everglades area that are also coming up online. And one of these, and I just received just this last week in our board meetings with Audubon, Florida, we were told that the Picayune Strand Restoration Project is now complete. There's a really interesting story about this. This was another one of these let's get quick rich land scams where people took 55,000 acres of land. They channelized, or they put some canals in there, channelized the canals to try to drain this area, and then they were going to sell it into residential lots. And it didn't exactly work. In fact, it says that this project today is expected to result in improved flows of water into the Collier Seminole State Park, 10,000 Islands National Wildlife Refuge, and the Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. All part of the Everglades watershed, by the way. You can see that it's very close. If the map just went a little bit further over, you'd see Naples over there. But this is complete, 55,000 acres of natural watershed that has been returned to the way it used to be when it was supposed to be a land scam. If you ever go across, again, the Tamiami Trail, as just before you get to Naples, there's a hotel complex there that looks like it's been there for a while, because it has. And in fact, that hotel complex used to be a drug transport camp, if you will. The main highway was actually the landing strip where planes from South America would land and unload their drugs, and then they would distribute it from there. This area of Florida is just ripe with all kinds of criminal schemes that used to take place. But things are turning around. Praise the Lord for that. Things are really turning around. And this is one of those areas. You can see Fakahatchee Strand is immediately over to the right of it, and Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge is above it. Areas that are crucial for wildlife, especially the Florida panther. And so it's just wonderful that we can say with great certainty that this has come back online and is now back to its natural state. So, what are the acceptable pollution limits in Everglades National Park? In phosphorus, no greater than 10 parts per billion. And as I said, the Miccosukee Indians sued because water that was going in there was 20 parts per billion or higher. And so we understand that we have to get that down. Mercury, no greater than 12 parts per trillion. Pesticides and other pollutants. Traces of pesticides like atrazine and endosulfan have been detected in there as well. I don't know what the standards are for those, but we still have those kind of problems. The South Florida Water Management District STAs just south of the EAA are being used to reduce and control harmful pollution levels, and other STAs are reducing pollution levels in stormwater treatment areas around Lake Okeechobee area. You've heard me talking about the Lakeside Ranch Stormwater Treatment Area. That is an STA on the eastern side of the lake. Again, we can actually allow you to go in there and see that by reservation. And that takes water from the northern watersheds, Nubbin Slough and the Taylor Creek area, and it goes through the STA, gets purified, and then it's released back into Lake Okeechobee. The reasons why it is released back into Lake Okeechobee because it's purified water, and by putting it back into the lake, it reduces the potential for algae blooms in the lake that could then come on down the St. Lucie River by way of the St. Lucie Canal. So, through countless studies, evaluations, we've come to realize that there is something wrong with the way that we have managed our environment over the past 125 years. It used to be, back in the early 1900s, it used to be that we had this manifest destiny, if you will. That if there was something wrong with our environment, we could fix it. After all, we dug the Panama Canal. We fixed it. We did something that the French couldn't do, and we made all kinds of dams. We made the TVA. We made Grand Coulee Dam in Washington State. We made the Hoover Dam on the Colorado River. So why couldn't we just go ahead and fix this with all of our projects? Well, we found out the hard way that we can't. The only problem that now remains to finally restoring the Everglades and the St. Lucie River and all the central and South Florida environment is to ensure the survival of the most endangered, critically species in our state. And that's a politician that has a political will. As Clyde Butcher said to me face to face, he said, politicians, they just don't give a damn. And that's a quote from Clyde Butcher. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas had another way of saying it. But first, it says here, what will the next 150 years bring to Central and South Florida? Climate change could alter our coastline for the foreseeable future. Saltwater intrusion into the Everglades could dramatically alter our overall ecosystem. Will the waters of Lake Okeechobee ever flow south again? We believe that they will, but to what extent, we don't know. Will we ever learn to live with our environment and keep our water clean? Man, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Will we ever permanently stop the water discharges out through the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie River? And as Marjorie Stoneman Douglas said, it's a race between man's intelligence and his stupidity, and I just don't know which will win. That is a sad commentary, but that's where we leave you tonight. It's your political will pushing against our legislators, our politicians, to make sure that they understand how important of an issue this is for us. Because there are so many of these guys that just don't give a flip. It's a sad commentary to the political reality that we have today. But if we're going to enjoy the incredible beauty that we have in the Everglades throughout the state of Florida, not just the Everglades watershed, but throughout the state of Florida, we have to make sure that they understand how important this is to us, how important this is to our kids. And the other thing that you need to understand, and they need to understand, is that unfortunately, all the birds that call this place their home, all the mammals, all the wild animals, all the fish, they don't have a vote. Unfortunately, we are the ones that have to take care of them, so let's get it done. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, before we leave tonight, I know that we've got a lot of online people, and I want to open it up for some questions for you guys. And I can't see where's a hoot out there, so Zach, if you could turn on the house lights a little bit, that'd be great, so I can see who's raising their hands. And I'll be more than happy to take some questions. And we have a hand all the way in the back. Yes, sir. Or ma'am. I'm sorry, could you say that again? I don't know, but it ain't happening. I know at one point in time when Governor Charlie Crist was the governor, we had 180 some odd thousand acres that was going to be leased for the purpose of building some of these SERP projects. And unfortunately, we lost that when the economy tanked in 2008. But I don't know. To the best of my knowledge, I think it was dropped, but I'm not 100% certain on that. I'm sorry. Okay, any other questions? Thank you. Okay, Zach, do we have any questions from the internet audience?
Yeah, sure. Let me take a look through our list here. We're just getting some questions rolling in from our folks watching at home. John, what's your best estimated guess for the year of completion for SERP?
My estimate is probably never, but online they're talking 2035.
When SERP is finally complete, will the Army Corps of Engineers still be the governing body making decisions about water flow in Florida?
That is a very good question, and Jackie Thurlow-Lipich, who is in the back there, would probably know more about than I would. But I believe that would be a combined decision between the South Florida Water Management District and the Army Corps of Engineers. Any question? Yes, ma'am.
They're proposing the largest slaughterhouse east of the Mississippi, right by Lake Okeechobee. Is there anyone aware or ready to fight for the pollution of the slaughterhouse water that's going to be?
Zach, can you repeat that question for us?
So one of our audience members here at the Blake brought up the fact that there's a proposal to build one of the largest slaughterhouses in the United States near Lake Okeechobee, and we're just east of the Mississippi. And the guest is wondering whether anybody is aware of that situation and willing to put a stake in the ground to stop it.
And your answer to that is that I was made aware of that only 2 weeks ago, and I am starting to do some research on that because that has got to stop. Yes. Any other questions? Yes, sir, in the very back. Thank you. The question is, a lot of the agricultural runoff in the past was it was primarily responsible for polluting our waters. But what is the situation going forward? The situation going forward now is that we have such massive amounts of residential land development that there is a lot of this agricultural, or not agricultural, but pollution runoff that is taking place because of the massive development for residential, communities, such as out in St. Lucie West, for example. And I'm not specifically trying to say that they're polluters, but they're just developing land like it's going out of style. It's incredible how quickly things are being developed there. And we need to make sure that when development happens, it's done, correctly and not to damage our environment. Obviously, anytime we take away from natural lands, that damages our environment. But we don't want our waters to become another cesspool just because of that kind of development.
John, we have a related question from one of our Zoom viewers. Is the sugar industry or pig and chicken farms more responsible for nutrient pollution to the Everglades?
Right now, I would say it's all the above. The sugar industry, to their credit, they have taken an awful lot of heat, and I think that they've probably cleaned up their act a little bit. I don't have specific facts and figures on that, but right now, I think the biggest threat to our watersheds is residential development. I really do, because, just 2 years ago, St. Lucie County issued 55,000 building permits in 1 year. That's incredible. And what that does to our water resources, God only knows. There has been a lot of thought about dredging the bottom of Lake Okeechobee, but there is so much muck, polluted muck in the bottom of Lake Okeechobee. It would take a huge effort to do that. And the feelings are is if you start stirring up that muck, then you're going to create more problems than you currently have. So the current feeling now is to leave it alone, let it sit there, and it's, as long as it's not disturbed, it's not really adding any more to the problem that we already have. You know, that could change tomorrow, but that's the current feelings. Yes, ma'am.
Are the python hunts that they're doing making enough of a difference to bring back some of the bird species?
I don't think so. The question was, are the python hunts that are going on in Lake Okeechobee and in the Everglades making a significant difference to help bring back some of the bird species? And the answer to that is, I seriously doubt it. You know, again, I lived in Africa, in Central and East Africa, and we used to have pythons all over the place out there. And the pythons are an incredibly resourceful and successful species. And when you put them into an environment full of water and alligators where you can't get to them very, very easily, they're, you know, all bets are off. Yeah.
All right, John, we've got some good questions coming in from our home audience. Somebody writes, I recall that 10,500 acres designated for storage south of the lake were considered to be not enough or not sufficient to clean the water, and that much more land should have been set aside for that purpose. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. The original Everglades, STA, if you will, which was proposed by Senator Joe Negron when he was a senator, was supposed to be 60,000 acres. And that's where Judy Sanchez and I sat down, and she basically said not only no, but blankety blank no. So that was proposed, 60,000 acres, then it was dropped down to 30,000 acres, and now we're at the current 10,500. So, you know, there's room for a lot of improvement, you know, but at least we've made a start.
And we'll take another one here from our Zoom audience. John, what can be done to curb the rampant residential development in Western St. Lucie County?
Believe it or not.
And for everybody at home, that got quite a chuckle out of the audience at the library.
Believe it or not, there was one time where we did not have any residential development or newcomers coming into Martin and St. Lucie County. Anybody want to take a guess as when that was? This is factual. It was immediately after Hurricane Francis when the National Guard was at the off-ramps of I-95 and they were checking IDs, and only residents of Martin and St. Lucie County could come in. Everybody else had to turn around and go home. Now, yeah, I know, we wish we could do that now. We can't. There's, unfortunately, you know, we're the sunshine state. How cold is it up in North Dakota right now? You know, people take in fact, one of my sons just moved up there a month and a half ago. What an idiot. I hope he doesn't see this. Kyle, I'm sorry, man, but, you know, I last week I turned 70 years old, and I'm now part of the old geezer club, right? And we love, you know, the nice warm weather. Again, I lived in Africa for 2.5 years. Good grief, who wants to go into an area where it's just cold, damp, drizzly, miserable, snowy? Let's move to Florida. We've got it.
Any other questions from our folks here at the Blake?
Yes, sir. Back, the comment was that, you know, I called the St. Lucie River the America's Amazon, and the James Bond movie, one of the movies was filmed on the St. Lucie River. The term America's Amazon actually goes back to the late 1800s, and specifically in the early 1900s. The Stewart area was actually built not on pineapple, but it was built on ecotourism. And ecotourism was so important to them that they received, they actually had former presidents such as Theodore Roosevelt, there were two others as well that I can't remember off the top of my head, but they had a concerted campaign of calling the St. Lucie River America's Amazon, or the Jungle River. You don't have to go down to South America to see what's down there. Come to Martin County and St. Lucie County and see the Jungle River. It's America's Amazon. And you'll see all the alligators and all these other critters that you would otherwise see elsewhere. And that's where it got its name.
All right, if we don't have any more questions, folks, I'd love you to help me give John an incredible round of applause as a thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Zach.
I do have Before we get up and go, hold on a second. Hold on. I do have some pretty cool news. I just checked online, and we have a total between here and the Zoom audience, 564 people watching tonight. So, John, I think that's a pretty good testament to the quality of programming that you give us time and time again, and the importance of this story. We have a full house at the Blake. There wasn't a seat left in the house, and we have over 300 more people watching at home. Folks, for those of you who are occasional participants, I know there's a lot of you here tonight because we have more in the audience than we normally do. This is the quality of speaker we have week after week. We don't just talk about neat things, we bring in people who are captivating. So please, if you only come once or twice a year because a topic looks interesting, I would challenge you to look at the schedule on the back table, look at the schedule on our website, and maybe come to a few others that might not seem as interesting on face value. I promise all of our speakers are going to tell wonderful stories. I hope to see you here again in 1 week for Val Paul from Smithsonian. And remember, if you are a first-time participant in the lecture series, stop by the table in the back, and Deanna will have some coupons for you to come visit the Coastal Center. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much.